There seems to be this perception going around that Daggerheart is just a game for theater kids. If you've spent any time in the community, you've definitely seen the implication. The game is all improv, there's no crunch, no rules, no stakes. It's just one big group therapy session where everyone's just trying to win the Oscar for best dramatic performance. But the reality is that the game is a lot more than that. You just need to open yourself up to seeing the bigger picture, and that's what I want to discuss today. So while Daggerheart may have been made by theater kids, and despite the fact that theater kids might like it, that doesn't somehow mean that it isn't also a game with rich mechanical depth, nuance, and a plethora of meaningful options. Like I say in my Discord server all the time, two things can be true. Let's talk about it. I've seen the comments dozens and dozens of times across my various Daggerheart videos and throughout the community. And while yes, there is some variance here and there, the common complaint I see people having with the game is that Daggerheart is a game that's too loose with the rules, it sounds way too complicated or just not fun to run, that it's homework for theater kids, and that it's all just pretend. I'm sorry, that one actually made me laugh when I read it. I think there's two main facets to explore here: design intent and reality. I've been fortunate enough to have both played and run Daggerheart multiple times across different versions of the game with a few different people. I'm not saying that I know everything, I'm just saying that I have a fair amount of experience with the system and feel pretty confident in what I'm about to say. Let's begin with design intent. The support has been absolutely unreal recently, thank you all so much. So if you'd like to help me out, subscribing to the channel and clicking the like button while you're there do way more than you realize and cost you nothing. Thank you so much. I'll be super clear up front. I'm not being paid by Darrington Press, this video is not sponsored by anyone, I'm not some random shill. All I want to encourage is more open and genuine conversation within the community. I'm not trying to gatekeep everything. Everything in this video is just my perspective and there's no objective right or wrong. It's just about facilitating open discussions and not always resorting to this good, that bad rhetoric. I like Daggerheart, I really do. I also love D&D and Indominant and DC-20 and tons of other games that I've played. TTRPGs are not zero sum. So what does Daggerheart have to say for itself then? Well, it describes itself as a heroic, narrative-focused experience that features combat as a prominent aspect of play. This short sentence tells us a lot about the game, but I also think is part of where the issues or some of the confusion arises. People see narrative-focused experience and stop reading. While it's absolutely true that the game does encourage investment in character arcs and storytelling, it's not simply abandoning mechanics or treating them as secondary. The mechanics of Daggerheart are instead woven into its own narrative fabric. The text continues on to say that the game emphasizes player-driven stories punctuated by exciting battles and harrowing challenges. And I'm not sure if I can possibly emphasize this enough, but those battles and challenges rely on its mechanical backbone in order to carry any weight. This is where I feel that many of the narrative-first critics are kind of missing the point. It's not that Daggerheart is rejecting mechanics, it's just not fetishizing complexity for complexity's sake. Taking a fiction-first approach is not saying that the game is necessarily rules light or anti-rules, but rather it's indicating that it's the fiction that invites mechanical resolution. You don't need to look at your character sheet to decide what to do. Instead, you describe what your character wants or does and the mechanics tell you what happens next. It's not that it's ignoring the system, it's just trusting that it's going to step in at the right time to enable things to run smoothly. The rules are not there to replace narrative, they're there to add weight and consequences to it. The game even acknowledges this directly when it states that the rules provide structure when it's unclear how actions or moments will resolve within that story. That's the very essence of game mechanics, helping determine outcomes where uncertainty exists. Without that structure, it actually is just group improv. I think what's by far the most misinterpreted line in this preamble is where it explains that players and GMs are encouraged to focus on the story they're telling rather than the complexity of the mechanics. Again, this is not just a dismissal of rules, it's just part of a broader design philosophy. It's telling you that you don't need to be like, oh, because X and Y thing are happening simultaneously on the third Tuesday following a new moon, I have an ability that triggers Z result, which means that I can just get to do whatever I want. The game just favors thematic resolutions over tactical micromanagement. I'll reiterate something I've said in numerous videos at this point: complexity for its own sake is not inherently good. What I believe that most people are actually discussing when they talk about complex systems are really deep systems, and I firmly believe that Daggerheart offers a strong balance of mechanical depth and narrative freedom. So no, Daggerheart isn't saying don't use the rules, it's saying don't let the rules drown the story. It's a system that believes that mechanics and narrative can and should support each other. It's not about choosing one or the other. It's about designing rules that serve the fiction while still offering meaningful decisions, uncertain outcomes, and real consequences. That's not a game without depth. That's a game that knows where its depth lies. I want to be abundantly clear at this point that none of this is me saying that Daggerheart is somehow a perfect or flawless game. It's not. There's plenty of weird balance issues, some text that doesn't really make sense here and there, and some contradictions that you'll find as well. And it's also just not a game for everyone either. The crux of what I'm getting at here is that there seems to be a strong misunderstanding and subsequent misrepresentation of what the game actually is trying to do, and it's resulting in people dismissing it without understanding even its most basic elements. I'm not saying that you need to play it or like it or anything at all for that matter. Different games exist because different people like different things. I enjoy hour-long YouTube videos about logistics, but I'm also addicted as hell to Love Island. I don't think that one is inherently better than the other, I just appreciate them for completely different reasons, and I struggle to understand why tabletop games can't be the same way for so many. You don't need to like everything, but that doesn't mean that that thing you don't like is just a chaotic mess and sucks and it's only for a bunch of try-hard drama failures. Alright, getting a little bit heated. And just to be clear, I was the farthest thing from a theater kid growing up. Anyway, we're going to keep talking about design intent. As I was preparing for this video, I decided to take a look at the preamble in the 2024 Player's Handbook and even some of the introductory elements to the new Dungeon Master's Guide. And this may come as a surprise to many people, but these games have so much more in common from a design intent perspective than you likely realize. There's quite literally a passage in both D&D and Daggerheart about winning and losing that legitimately may as well have been written by the same person. It's genuinely uncanny. But it's way more than just that one passage too, so let's actually switch things up and play a game of which preamble is this from. The premise here is simple. I'm going to read a series of passages that may come from either Dungeons & Dragons or Daggerheart, and your goal will be to determine which passage comes from which game. Let me know in the comments what your score was. Alrighty, let's begin. You don't need to be a master storyteller or a brilliant artist. You just need to aspire to create, to have the courage of someone who's willing to build something and share it with others. So, D&D or Daggerheart? Well, if you said Daggerheart, you'd be incorrect. The passage comes straight from the 2014 Player's Handbook. Next up, here we go. Use only the rules that serve your fun and always follow your group's bliss. It's getting tricky now. If you said Daggerheart, that is still incorrect. This comes directly from the 2024 Player's Handbook. Okay, last one. This is a game about telling a story as a group. Let all players contribute through the words and deeds of their characters. Encourage everyone to engage by asking them what their characters are doing. This one is surely Daggerheart. Oh no, it's not. Turns out that was actually D&D as well and comes from the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide. Now look, if you got all of these correct because D&D does have a pretty recognizable writing style and you guessed based on syntax rather than content, that kind of proves my point. Any of these could easily have come straight from the Daggerheart core rules. Don't believe me? They all have direct equivalents there as well. The game embraces player agency and imagination. The type of character you choose to play and the decision you make about their background and experience will make your odds better or worse on those rolls. As long as your group agrees, everything can be adjusted to fit your playstyle. If there's a rule you'd rather ignore or modify, feel free to implement any change with your table's consent. In Daggerheart, you and your fellow players will all take turns describing what your characters do. The GM determines the consequences of those actions, then guides the group into collaboratively evolving the narrative based on those consequences. What's particularly funny to me is that I think for all of these, the versions that come from D&D honestly sound more stereotypically Daggerheart than the ones that come from Daggerheart. Go figure. The point that I'm trying to make with this silly little shtick is really that the game that Dungeons & Dragons claims that it wants to be is not all that dissimilar to the game that Daggerheart wants to be either. The difference is that D&D comes with 50 years of baggage and Daggerheart does not. And I'm not saying that in necessarily a bad way either. It's just the reality of the situation. Dungeons & Dragons has edition after edition, rules that have been changed or varied over the years, sage advice, Twitter rulings for some reason, an enormous homebrew community. The game at this point in its lifespan is not really the game that the designers necessarily want it to be, but rather it's the game that the people have made it, for better or worse. People come to the table with a plethora of different experience levels and knowledge of the game, each wanting something unique. But at the end of the day, with so many people having played D&D and with an extraordinary amount of resources available to help you learn, Dungeons & Dragons is kind of just a known quantity, and that's what so many people love about it. They know how it works and they know what they can change. They feel comfortable with it, and more importantly, they feel comfortable with their version of the game. I made a video about this concept like a year ago where I discussed the question of how much of D&D can you change before you're just not playing D&D anymore. It was a very fun video and an interesting thought experiment that's still quite relevant today. Anyway, to get back to the central point, when you break it all down and evaluate the core design intent, Daggerheart and Dungeons & Dragons are really not all that different. Sure, D&D probably leans a bit more on the rules than Daggerheart does, But that's not an inherently good or bad thing, it's just a different thing. Some players will prefer one over the other or enjoy them both for their own reasons. Daggerheart, though, for better or worse, is inextricably tied to Critical Role. The upside here is that the game will benefit from a lot of easily accessible publicity and will likely be at least tried by many of their fans. The downside is that there are a lot of people who hate Critical Role because they hate Critical Role, and as a result will instinctually hate anything that comes from that world. Now again, that is not to say that there are not any valid criticisms or reasons to dislike Daggerheart, it's just saying that there are a non-zero amount of people who will dislike it because they do not like Critical Role, end of story. The thing is though, that show demonstrated that there is, to at least some degree, an appetite for exactly the type of game that Daggerheart is trying to be, a narrative-focused experience that features combat as a prominent aspect of play. Matt does not run Critical Role games rules as written, and no one cares. He lets the narrative of the moment dictate thematic resolutions and uses relevant rules to provide structure to otherwise complicated situations. So rather than continue to try and shoehorn that style into D&D, they just work to create a system that better supports that style of play. This again does not mean that Daggerheart is a game without rules, but instead it's one that just uses them a bit differently. It's a game where the rules are not intended to say what you can or can't do, but rather one that uses them to guide resolutions. Okay, I think we've talked enough about design intent and hopefully I've managed to get my point across. The second thing that I wanted to talk about was the actual reality of playing the game. Like I mentioned earlier, I've had the opportunity to play Daggerheart quite a few times as both a GM and a player, and I'll be completely honest, in the grand scheme of things, it's not really all that different from D&D from either the player or the GM side. The biggest difference really just is that it's a lot more liberating and open, and the inclusion of hope and fear creates some exciting uncertainty that doesn't really exist in D&D. Coming from Dungeons & Dragons where things tend to be more structured and predetermined by the DM, that's likely to be the thing that most people will need to adjust to the most. The fact that your dice influence the situation in real time. This is probably a big part of why people say that it's just for theater kids, because I think that you need to be constantly improvising stuff on the spot, but it really doesn't have to be that deep. I promise. I recently ran a one-shot for Nathan from D&D Unoptimized, Alex of Exploring the Build, Zarek from Odin's Key Gaming, and my friend Julio who does all the production for my live events. This one-shot, by the way, I was converting on the spot from Heart of Ashes from the D&D anthology book, Keys from the Golden Vault. Anyway, pretty early on, they approached a door and wanted to gently press it open. I asked for a finesse roll to determine just how quietly and precisely they were able to do so, and they managed to succeed with hope. Now, I as the GM knew that there were patrolling guards on the other side of the door. So, since they succeeded with hope, I made it so that the guard had just turned in the opposite direction and was now walking away from the door and was unaware of it opening. That's it. That's not some god tier master level improv. Dude opened the door, and because he rolled with hope, the guard didn't see it. If he had succeeded with fear instead, I probably would have had the door creak or something, alerting the guard to a sound, but perhaps not exactly where it was coming from. If he failed with hope, the guards would probably have heard the sound and started coming toward them, but they would still have the benefit of being behind the door. If they failed with fear, the guard would probably have been right there. None of this is impressive or particularly challenging to me, even if you've run just a few D&D games. Now, I know there are probably some people getting upset because maybe I shouldn't have even asked for a roll in that moment because that's not what Daggerheart is all about. And to that I'd say, okay. We're all still learning the game and getting used to it and trying to embrace its differences as much as we can, and we're still all living very much with 5e brains. And that's kind of the point that I'm trying to emphasize here. If you start playing Daggerheart, you don't need to instantly transform into Matt Mercer. No one is expecting that in much the same way that no one is expecting your home D&D game to look like an episode of Critical Role. Play the game, learn what makes it tick and how it's unique from 5e or any other system, and enjoy it for what it is. I'll be clear that Daggerheart absolutely does encourage players to be invested in the story, each other, and the game overall, and also to consider things that are a bit more broad than just yourself. The thing is though, that it's not like you're punished for not doing that. Sure, there are some cards or features that might ask you to compliment an ally or learn something new about them in order to gain a bonus, but not only are those few and far between, but they can also serve as a very small and subtle way to allow players to become more comfortable and used to playing in character. So while Daggerheart does encourage engagement, it by no means requires it. Players are free to ramp up at their own pace or not at all, and that's part of the beauty of the system. Doing those things will allow you to get the most out of the game, but not doing them isn't going to detract from your experience either. One point I want to make to the there's no game crowd for those who don't think there are powerful or creative options or for those who are interested in optimization. Let me tell you right now, there absolutely are. In that same one-shot, Alex from Exploring the Build was running a highly optimized Clank Wizard that was able to absolutely pop off with fireballs during the game. He made incredible use of the stress mechanic and cards and items that fed into it. The build was so cool and so much fun. He really leaned into the theme with his experiences that he selected and his roleplay during the game, and it truly showed off the fact that there is plenty of room for optimized builds during play, and it does not need to come at the expense of the rest of the group, which is what many of the comments on his video about the build suggest that it would do, with all kinds of assertions that it totally undermines the premise of the game, which I vehemently disagree with. Optimized builds does not necessitate a domineering player, and the cards and abilities have all been designed in a way to enable them to work together. So to suggest that you shouldn't be allowed to use obvious combos is frankly silly. Nothing he did was in bad faith or required questionable reading or interpretations either. I'll leave a link to his video about the build in the description and the pinned comment. I would strongly recommend checking it out. It was a ton of fun and helped open my eyes to a whole other dimension to the game. And if we were to go one step further, Nathan from D&D Unoptimized actually went through the incredible effort of creating a damage calculation tool for Daggerheart, and he also made an entire video about it. Some might feel that this pushes the limit of what the quote-unquote intent of Daggerheart is, but I really don't think that's the case. Optimization and analytics are what a large subset of players love about TTRPGs, so to gatekeep the game on those grounds feels also silly. I'll reiterate that just because someone has a deeper grasp of the mechanics or math behind a game, it does not make them an inherently problematic player. And it turns out that Daggerheart has plenty to offer from the analytics perspective. Now, I'm not about to start creating optimized characters, but I love that the game is already fostering groups of people who are thinking about things in a different way. I'll also leave a link to his video in the description and the pinned comment. You should definitely check that one out too. Now, all that being said, I think it would be completely fair to say that Daggerheart probably asks a bit more of its players, including the GM, in terms of trust. I don't think it's drastically more than 5e or any other game though. I do understand the reservations about the potential difficulty of running the game. I felt many of those same things and even discussed them on this very channel. But the reality is that as long as you're with a group that you have fun with and are willing to embrace the game for what it is, no one is or should be expecting you to be a master level improv professional on day one. We don't expect that of our D&D GMs, so why is it any different here? The more you play, the better you get. It really is that simple. One comment I came across put it quite well when they said, "It's hilarious that all the criticism directed toward the game are based on player behavior instead of how the game actually plays." And this is, for the most part, pretty accurate. A great deal of the complaints that I hear fundamentally come back to problem players being problem players. If someone is going to constantly be shouting over others or hog the spotlight or get mad when they don't get what they want, that person is probably going to be a problem player in any system. So to judge a game by a hypothetical problem player is just doing a disservice to everyone. Again, I'll reiterate, Daggerheart is not without its share of faults. Criticizing the game for those faults is a completely valid thing to do. Anyway, that's all I got. Let me know your thoughts about Daggerheart or learning new games. I really just want to incentivize and encourage more open conversations in the community. Not everything needs to be good or bad. There's a whole spectrum in between. Anyway, check out some of my other videos, and thanks to all my patrons for your constant support. You guys are amazing. But otherwise, take care.